besties, thought I'd just come on and read you a little bit more of Mattie. So here's the book we're reading, Mattie, about the little hedgehog family. And I'll start from where we kind of left off. One evening the hedgehogs found a rare treat in their dish. Some stewing steak had proved too tough and gristly to cut up, and the woman had put it out for them to eat. They pounced on it, chewing and tearing at it noisily. Pinky and one of the other youngsters both grabbed the same lump of steak, and a vigorous tug of war began. But Pinky was far stronger than the other little hedgehog and was soon forced to let go. So suddenly that Pinky and the meat went head over heels backwards. Pinky did not mind. Her bristles protected her as she rolled over, and she had the meat too. A young she-cat sometimes came into the garden of the house when Mattie and her family were feeding, and eyed them with great interest. She had never seen a hedgehog before. She once crept up to the dish when Mattie was eating and tried to steal some of the milk, but the hedgehog put up her bristles, and when the cat bent to sniff at her, her nose came into contact with their sharp points. The cat gave one howl of pain and fled. She was never seen in the garden again. Early in July, it was clear that Mattie was going to have yet another litter. The gestation period of hedgehogs is only about 6 weeks, and a healthy female often has 2 litters in a year. Mattie walked slowly and heavily, and she was impatient of the frolics of her 3 youngsters. She went for her supper of bread and milk earlier than the others did. She could be seen waiting for it at about 9 o'clock every evening. If the weather was wet, she sheltered under a weatherboard at the back door, and anyone going out had to open the door very carefully for fear of hurting her. The 3 youngsters were now 2 months old and were able to fend for themselves, but they could not understand why their mother snarled at them and chased them away when they tried to play with her. She snapped at them when they came to feed at the dish, so they gradually left her alone and went to hunt across the gardens for themselves. In the end, Mattie would not let them sleep with her in the hole behind the compost heap, so they wandered off into the lane and found homes for themselves in the hedge. Pinky slept in several different places, each further away from the bread and milk house, until she eventually came to the grounds of the old hall where she met a young boar. They ran together for the remainder of the summer and hibernated in a corner of the tool shed from which Tom Endicott had cut the overgrown creepers on the afternoon when he had disturbed Mattie's mother. In spring, they mated and found a new colony of hedgehogs in the grounds of the old hall. Sometimes Pinky and her mate hunted around the lane towards the waste, and once or twice the woman from the house found Pinky feeding at the dish, but Mattie and Pinky met as strangers. Towards the end of July, Mattie and Quill wandered along the front path of the house and came to the road, where they started to cross, with Quill leading and his mate following some distance behind. When the boar was about halfway across, he felt the ground trembling and heard a great roaring in the distance. He froze immediately, but the noise came nearer and nearer. Then there was a blinding light, and the earth shook. The noise came nearer still, and Quill panicked. He rushed madly towards the safety of the garden, but he was too late. One of the front wheels of the lorry went over him and squashed him flat. When the great noise had roared away into the distance, Mattie left the gutter where she had been cowering and ran out into the road in search of her mate, but she could only recognise him by his smell. She ran back into the garden and crouched, shivering with terror, in the hole behind the compost heap. Next day her 3rd litter were born. There were only 2 babies. Both of them were very puny. Mattie was still terrified by the adventure of the night before, but she washed and suckled her young and kept them warm with her body. That same evening, Bert, Schmal's dog, found Mattie's nest. He was nosing around in the garden and heard strange sounds coming from the compost heap. so he stuck his nose as far into the hole as it would go and scrambled at the layers with his paws. The hole was too small for him to force his way into the nest, but Mattie could see his face and feel his hot breath on her. The dog barked again and again, daring her to come out. His tongue drooled saliva onto the seal of the nest. The commotion brought the man to the back door of the house, and he chased Bert's dog away. Mattie stood tense, with her bristles up, guarding the entrance to her nest. Although she was trembling with fright, she could not curl up and leave her babies unprotected. She stood motionless for a long time, looking warily out of the nest and making little spitting sounds. Then she turned and ate her young, as hedgehogs will do if they are frightened or worried during or immediately after the time when the litter is born. Mattie no longer slept in the hole behind the compost heap. A spider wove its web across the entrance of the nest, and the woman from the house noticed that the threads remained unbroken. Each morning the hedgehog's bread and milk was found untouched, and the silvery trail of snails began to shine on the path in the garden. Mattie was living deep in the heart of a patch of nettles on the waste. Although the fright she had had after the birth of her latest litter had been a dim memory, she still avoided the gardens. During the month of August, she hunted alone on the banks of the lake. Summer had burned itself out with the end of July, and in the nights it was cool and cloudy. The chill in the air reminded the hedgehog that winter was on its way, and she started to make a nest in a blackberry thicket. But one night she smelt the hated scent of badger near the entrance of the tunnel which she had made through the long grass. She had never seen a badger, but she knew that its scent meant danger. So she set off under the star-lidden sky to the safety of her old familiar hunting grounds. Next morning, Amelia Dart told her neighbour that she had been awakened by a strange scratching sound during the night. She had looked out of her window, she said, and there, in the moonlight, she had seen a great fuzzy pig sliding up and down on my chicken house door. Amelia had a dismantled hen coop leaning against the hedge in her back garden. Its rotting wood was covered with green and yellow lichen, and at night woodlice ran over it in their hundreds, and slugs crawled around its base. Mattie had spent the night climbing up the door of this old chicken house, feeding on woodlice as she went, and then crawling and curled herself up in a ball and sliding down again. After gorging herself in the woodlice, she had slept all day in the double hedge near the spot where she was actually born. The familiar scents awoke old memories, and the next evening Mattie ran to the bread and milk house and grunted outside the back door for her supper. The flower pot was still full of leaves and hay, and the inside was warm and dry, so she started to prepare for hibernation. The man from the house brought some more hay and left it in the garden near the pot, and each night Mattie carried mouthfuls of it into her winter quarters until the flower pot was so full that there was hardly room for her to squeeze inside. In mid-September, she settled down for her winter sleep. It was the first time she had hibernated alone, but the flower pot was so cosy that she did not miss the other hedgehogs. She only came out once during the winter, and the woman saw her rooting in the dead leaves under the sycamore tree and gave her some bread and some milk. That winter was mild and wet, and Mattie woke early in the spring. Although it was only the first week of March, the weather was warm and sunny. I'll leave that there for now. I'll be back to read some more very, very shortly. Bye, besties. Bye.